The rain poured heavily over the cemetery as Daniel Carter knelt before the white marble tombstone. His hands trembled as he placed a bouquet of lilies on the damp earth. The name engraved on the stone seemed to tear pieces from his soul. Emily Carter, 8 years old, beloved daughter. 3 weeks. Only 3 weeks since the fire had destroyed the country house. 3 weeks since his reason for living had been brutally taken from him. Daniel sobbed, unable to control the tears that mixed with the stormwater. He couldn't understand how everything had happened so fast. Emily had been spending the weekend with her stepmother Vanessa at the rural property when the fire started. The firefighters said it was an accident with the fireplace. Vanessa survived with minor burns. Emily hadn't been so lucky. At least, that's what everyone believed. A few meters away, hidden behind an ancient tree, a brown-haired girl watched everything. Her green eyes were fixed on the man crying over his own child's grave. Emily bit her lips to keep from screaming. Every sob of her father was like a knife to her chest. She so badly wanted to run to him, to hug him, to tell him she was alive. But she couldn't. Not yet. They had made it very clear what would happen if she tried to escape or ask for help. The memory of the night of the fire still burned in her mind more than the actual flames. Vanessa had woken Emily in the middle of the night with a cloth over her face. The chemical smell made her faint within seconds. When she woke up, she was in a dark, cold basement. Her Uncle Richard's hands held her arms tightly. It was Richard who explained everything with a cruel smile. The fire had been intentional. They used the body of an unknown child that they had bought on the black market to make it look like Emily had died. All part of a bigger plan that she still didn't fully understand. During those endless days in captivity, Emily listened to Vanessa and Richard talking on the other side of the locked door. They talked about money. About inheritance. About how Daniel was so destroyed that he could barely get out of bed. About how easy it was to maintain the deception. But today was different. Today Richard had allowed her to come to the cemetery, but only to watch from a distance. He was hidden at another point, watching her every move with threatening eyes. If she screamed or tried to run to her father, Richard had promised that Daniel would die instantly. Emily swallowed her sobs as she watched her father slowly get up. Daniel wiped his face with his hands and kissed the cold tombstone before starting to walk back to the car. His shoulders were slumped. He looked 10 years older in just 3 weeks. Vanessa suddenly appeared beside Daniel, holding a black umbrella. She placed her hand on his shoulder in a gesture that seemed comforting, but Emily knew the truth. That woman was a monster disguised as an angel. Daniel leaned on Vanessa, and they walked together to the parking lot. The scene would have been touching to any outside observer. A devastated man being supported by his loving wife in the hardest moment of his life. But Emily knew it was all a lie. Every affectionate gesture from Vanessa was calculated. Every word of comfort was false. And her father had no idea that the woman comforting him was the same one who had stolen his daughter. A grip on her arm brought her back to reality. Richard was beside her, his fingers digging into her skin like claws. "Time to go back," he whispered in a cold voice. Emily cast one last look at her father's car disappearing around the curve. A solitary tear ran down her face. She made a silent promise at that moment. No matter how long it took. No matter what she had to do. She would find a way to reveal the truth and return to her father's arms. As Richard dragged her back to the car parked at the back exit of the cemetery, Emily memorized every detail of the route. Every street. Every sign. Every landmark. When the right opportunity came, she would know exactly how to escape. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on what you thought of the story and from which city or country you're watching the video. The car left, raising dust from the dirt road. Inside, Emily remained silent, but her mind was already working on a plan. She was just a child, but the pain and love for her father made her stronger than any adult could imagine. The basement where Emily was being held was in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The concrete walls were damp and cold. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered constantly, creating frightening shadows. There was a thin mattress in the corner, a bucket that served as a bathroom, and nothing else. Richard shoved her inside and locked the heavy door with 3 different padlocks. Emily heard his footsteps going up the wooden stairs. Then she heard voices. Vanessa had arrived. The girl silently approached the door and pressed her ear against the icy wood. The voices came from upstairs through an old ventilation duct. She could hear almost everything when they talked in the kitchen. "He is completely destroyed," Vanessa said with satisfaction in her voice. "He can't even sign documents properly. His hands shake all the time." "Perfect," Richard replied. "The weaker he gets, the easier the next phase will be." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Next phase? What were they planning to do now? "Have you already started the medicine?" Richard asked. There was a pause. Emily held her breath. "I started yesterday," Vanessa replied calmly. "I put a small dose in his coffee every morning. Enough arsenic to make him gradually sick, but nothing that looks suspicious. The doctors will think it's depression affecting his health." Emily covered her mouth with her hands so she wouldn't scream. They were poisoning her father. Killing him slowly while pretending to take care of him. The monstrosity of the plan was so great that she could barely process it. "How long?" Richard asked. 6 months at most, Vanessa calculated coldly. Long enough to seem natural. A 42-year-old man who died of grief over the loss of his daughter. No one will suspect a thing. "And the will?" "I already took care of that. Daniel was so disturbed last week that he signed several documents without even reading them. Among them, an update to the will leaving everything to me. Since his daughter is dead and there are no other heirs, I get the 3 billion. Richard let out a low, cruel laugh. "And my share?" 500 million as soon as the money is released, Vanessa promised. "You'll be rich, brother. Just like we planned from the beginning." Emily slid down the door to the cold floor. Silent tears ran down her face. They were siblings. Vanessa and Richard were siblings planning Daniel's murder together from the very beginning. Vanessa's marriage to her father 2 years earlier had been just part of an elaborate plan. She remembered how Vanessa had appeared in their lives. Her father had been alone since Emily's mother had died of cancer when she was only 3 years old. Vanessa seemed perfect. Beautiful, affectionate, attentive. Emily had even liked her at first. But now everything made sense. The small strange moments that Emily had noticed but not understood. The times when Vanessa looked at the things in the house with calculating eyes. The whispered phone calls she made late at night. The secret meetings she claimed were with friends. And the girl? Richard asked upstairs. "What do we do with her afterward?" Emily stopped breathing. "After Daniel dies and the money is ours, she becomes an unnecessary problem," Vanessa said with the same coldness of someone talking about throwing away trash. "We'll have to take care of that." "Take care of it," Richard repeated with a tone that made the meaning clear. Emily felt nauseous. They were planning to kill her too. She was just an inconvenient witness who needed to be eliminated after fulfilling her role of making Daniel suffer enough to weaken him. "But we need to keep her alive for now," Vanessa continued. "If something goes wrong and we need a plan B, she's still useful. We can pretend that we found her and return her to her father if it's necessary to clean up our image." "You think of everything," Richard praised. "I didn't get where I am by being careless," Vanessa replied. "Every step was planned years in advance. Daniel Carter was handpicked. A lonely billionaire widower with a small daughter. Emotionally vulnerable. Easy to manipulate." Emily felt anger grow inside her chest. Anger that replaced fear. Her father was not weak. He was good. Generous. He trusted people because he had a pure heart. And those monsters were using exactly that against him. The voices upstairs continued talking about details of the plan. About how Vanessa would pretend sadness at the funeral. About how Richard would inherit part of the businesses as the trustworthy brother-in-law. About the countries where they planned to live after everything was over. But Emily was no longer listening in despair. Now she listened with purpose. Every detail she discovered was a weapon she could use in the future. She recorded everything in her memory. Dates. Names. Plans. When silence finally returned and the lights on the upper floor were turned off, Emily curled up on the thin mattress. But she did not sleep. Her mind worked frantically. She needed to get out of there. She needed to reach her father before it was too late. But how? Richard checked the basement 3 times a day. The windows were too high and had iron bars. The door had padlocks she couldn't open. Then Emily looked at the ventilation duct in the ceiling. It was small, but she was small too. If she could reach it, maybe there was a chance. Emily waited for 3 days, observing every detail of Richard's routine. He came down at 7 in the morning with a plate of cold food. He returned at noon to check if she was still there. The last visit was at 9 at night before going to sleep. Between those times, she had windows of opportunity to act. On the 4th day, she put her plan into action. When Richard brought the morning meal, Emily pretended to be very sick. She groaned in pain, holding her stomach. He simply threw the plate on the floor and left laughing. But she noticed something important. He was wearing the same worn coat from the past few days, which meant he hadn't left the house. This gave her valuable information. Vanessa was alone with her father at the mansion. Richard stayed at the abandoned house most of the time, watching the prisoner. They took turns. Emily stacked the mattress against the wall under the ventilation duct. She climbed carefully. The metal was rusted and came loose easily when she forced it with her small hands. The space was tight, but she managed to squeeze inside. She crawled through the dark duct, breathing in dust and cobwebs. Her knees and elbows ached against the metal, but she kept going. She needed to move fast before Richard's noon visit. The ventilation ran throughout the old house like a metal labyrinth. After what felt like hours but was only 20 minutes, Emily found an exit grate that led to an empty room on the upper floor. She kicked it hard until the rusty screws gave way. The grate fell to the floor with a noise that echoed through the silent house. Emily threw herself out and ran. Her bare feet made almost no sound on the rotten wooden floor. She ran down the stairs with her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. The front door was chained, but the kitchen back door had only a simple lock. She turned the latch, and the door opened. Fresh air filled her lungs. Freedom. Emily ran through the tall grass of the abandoned yard. She didn't look back. She just ran with all the strength her legs could muster. She crossed a forest, jumped a stream, followed a dirt road until she saw houses in the distance. Civilization. Safety. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't ask strangers for help. Richard and Vanessa had connections. They could be watching the local police or hospitals, waiting for her to show up. Emily trusted only one person in the entire world. Her father. She remembered the route Richard had taken from the cemetery to the house. She remembered the signs. The streets. Her father had always said she had a photographic memory. Now that ability was her greatest weapon. It took 4 hours of walking, hiding behind cars and walls every time she saw someone, but Emily finally recognized the neighborhood. Her father's mansion was only 10 blocks away. She quickened her pace, even with her feet bleeding from walking barefoot. When the large white house appeared at the end of the street, tears of relief filled her eyes. But then she stopped. Vanessa was there. She couldn't just ring the doorbell. She needed to be smart. Emily went around the tall wall until she found the tree she always used to escape from her room when she wanted adventures in the garden. She climbed the branches with difficulty. Her hands were weak from hunger and exhaustion, but she managed to reach the top of the wall and jump into the garden. The house was silent. Emily approached the library window on the ground floor. It was where her father spent most of his time since she had died. He was there, sitting in the brown leather armchair, staring into nothing. There was a half-full cup of coffee on the side table. The coffee. The poison. Emily panicked. She didn't know if that cup was already poisoned. She needed to act fast. She tapped lightly on the window glass. Daniel didn't move. She tapped harder. This time he slowly turned his head as if in a trance. When his eyes met hers through the glass, he froze. Completely motionless, as if he had seen a ghost. Which, technically, was true. Emily was tapping on the window like a ghost returning from the dead. She motioned for him to open. Daniel got up unsteadily. His hands shook so much that he could barely unlock the window. When he finally opened it, Emily jumped inside and threw herself into his arms. "Emily," he whispered, his voice broken. "You're alive. You're alive." "Dad, there's no time," she said quickly between sobs. "I have to tell you everything. Vanessa and Richard. They planned everything. The fire. My kidnapping. And now they're poisoning you. That coffee. You can't drink it." Daniel held his daughter's face in his hands as if he needed to make sure she was real. "Poisoning? What are you saying?" Emily told him everything at once. Every detail she had heard. The plans. The fake will. The 3 billion. The coldness with which Vanessa and Richard discussed killing them both. Every word came out like a waterfall of truth, finally being set free. Daniel listened, growing paler with every second. When Emily finished, he looked at the cup of coffee on the table. Then he looked at the library door. Vanessa could appear at any moment. "We need to get out of here now," he said. "No," Emily held his arm. "If we run, they'll disappear. They'll make up another story. They might even say you kidnapped me in a fit of madness. We need proof. We need to make them confess." Daniel looked at his 8-year-old daughter with a mix of pride and sadness. She had grown so much in those terrible weeks. She was no longer just a child. She was a survivor. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Emily thought quickly. Her eyes shone with determination. "They think you're weak. They think they control everything. We're going to use that against them. But I need you to trust me and be strong enough to pretend for a few more days." Daniel hugged his daughter tightly. For the first time in weeks, he felt something beyond despair. He felt anger. A cold, calculated anger that would give him the strength to do what needed to be done. Emily hid in the mansion's attic for 2 days. Daniel brought her food and water secretly whenever Vanessa went out for her therapy appointments, which were actually meetings with Richard. During this time, father and daughter planned every detail of their revenge. "They need to feel safe," Emily explained. "So safe that they will completely let their guard down." Daniel agreed. He had stopped drinking the poison coffee, secretly pouring it into plant pots when Vanessa wasn't looking. But he continued pretending to be weak. He trembled deliberately. Signed documents with shaky handwriting. Cried at strategic moments. On the 3rd day, Daniel called his personal lawyer, Thomas Way, someone he had known for 20 years and completely trusted. He asked him to come to the mansion secretly through the back entrance. When Thomas arrived and saw Emily alive, he almost fainted from shock. "Mr. Carter, this is impossible. I saw the death certificate. I was at the funeral." Everything was forged, Daniel explained, showing the recordings he had made over the past few days. He had placed hidden microphones throughout the house. The conversations between Vanessa and Richard had all been recorded. Discussions about the poison. About the money. About plans to eliminate Emily afterward. Thomas listened, his expression growing increasingly horrified. "We need to go to the police immediately." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Not yet. I want them to confess everything publicly. I want the whole world to see who they really are. These monsters don't deserve just prison. They deserve complete humiliation." Emily held her father's hand with a sad smile. "We have a plan." Daniel explained to Thomas what needed to be done. The lawyer hesitated but agreed. 2 weeks later, everything was ready. Daniel had visibly worsened, or at least, that's what Vanessa and Richard believed. He stayed in the room most of the time. Barely ate. His skin was pale. He had started taking the medications Vanessa offered even more frequently. What she didn't know was that Daniel threw the pills away and used theatrical makeup to look even sicker. One morning, Vanessa entered the room and found Daniel lying on the floor next to the bed. She checked his pulse with cold fingers. Weak. Very weak. A discreet smile appeared on his lips. She called emergency services with a voice thick with false concern. "My husband collapsed. Please come quickly." At the hospital, the doctors declared that Daniel had gone into a coma. Multiple organ failure. Likely poisoning by an unknown substance, but his body was too weak for further invasive tests. There was nothing more they could do except keep him comfortable. Vanessa cried crocodile tears while calling Richard. It worked. He's going to die within hours. 3 days later, the chief doctor called Vanessa for a private conversation. Daniel Carter had died during the night. She signed the cremation papers with steady hands. No autopsy. Nothing that could reveal the poison. The funeral was scheduled for the following week. Vanessa wore an elegant black dress and played the part of the grieving widow perfectly. Richard was at her side as the supportive brother-in-law. The church was filled with businessmen, employees, and acquaintances of the Carter family. After the ceremony, Thomas Way asked everyone present to remain seated for the official reading of the will. It was unusual to do this at a funeral, but Thomas insisted it was Daniel's expressed wish. Vanessa and Richard exchanged satisfied looks as the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. Daniel Carter's will is very simple, Thomas began. He leaves his entire fortune of $3 billion to his beloved daughter, Emily Carter. The church fell into confused silence. Someone whispered that the daughter was dead. Thomas continued, ignoring the murmurs. And in the unlikely event that Emily cannot inherit, everything must be donated to charity. Nothing, absolutely nothing, shall go to Vanessa Carter. Vanessa stood up, furious. This is a mistake. I have an updated will that Daniel signed 3 weeks ago. That will was declared invalid, Thomas replied calmly. Signed under psychological coercion. But don't worry, Mrs. Carter. There's more. The side doors of the church opened. Police officers entered in formation. And then, something impossible happened. Daniel Carter entered through the main door. Alive. Healthy. Walking with firm steps. And beside him, holding his hand, was Emily. Vanessa turned white as paper. Richard tried to run but was blocked by 2 officers. The silence in the church was replaced by shouts of shock and confusion. Surprise, Daniel said, looking directly at Vanessa. His voice echoed through the microphone Thomas had left on. I discovered something interesting in the past few weeks. When you think someone is dead, people show who they really are. He signaled, and a screen descended behind the altar. The recordings began to play. Every conversation. Every plan. Every monstrous detail of Vanessa and Richard's conspiracies. Their own voices condemned them in front of hundreds of witnesses. Vanessa tried to scream that it was a lie, that it was manipulation, but her voice was swallowed by the chaos. Richard tried to attack Daniel but was taken down by security before taking 3 steps. Vanessa Carter and Richard Morrison, the sheriff announced loudly, you are under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Handcuffs clicked onto both of their wrists. Vanessa looked at Emily with pure hatred. The girl simply held her father's hand tighter and smiled. A smile that said without words, you lost. As the 2 were dragged out of the church amidst camera flashes and reporter shouts, Daniel knelt in front of his daughter. You were very brave. We were brave together, Emily corrected. 3 months had passed since that day in the church. The trial of Vanessa and Richard had been swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings. Forged documents. The body of the child they had used in the fake funeral had been identified through black market records. Every lie was exposed under the relentless light of justice. Vanessa received 25 years in prison. Richard got 30 for being considered the physical executor of the plan. Both were also ordered to pay multimillion-dollar damages that they obviously would never be able to pay. Their names became synonymous with betrayal in news reports across the entire country. Daniel and Emily watched the court's final verdict without showing emotion. There was no satisfaction in seeing 2 people destroyed, even if they deserved it. There was only a silent relief that it was finally over. But the real healing began after the spotlight went out. Daniel sold the mansion. There were too many memories in those walls. Memories of a false happiness built on lies. He bought a smaller house by a quiet lake. A place where he and Emily could truly start over. The first days were strange. Emily would wake in the middle of the night screaming, reliving the dark basement in her nightmares. Daniel held her until the tears stopped, whispering that she was safe now. That no one would ever hurt her again. Daniel also struggled with his own demons. The guilt of not realizing who Vanessa really was. The shame of having been so blind. The constant fear that something could take Emily from him again. They started therapy together. Twice a week, they sat in Dr. Helena Ramos's office and talked about everything. About the trauma. About broken trust. About how to rebuild a life after it had been shattered. You survived the worst thing that could happen to a family, Dr. Helena said in one session. Now you need to learn that surviving is not the same as living. Living requires courage to be happy again. Her words stayed with Daniel. Being happy again seemed like an impossible task. But he decided to try. For Emily. And for himself. On a sunny Saturday morning, Daniel woke Emily early. They drove to the cemetery where the fake marble tombstone was still standing. Emily held her father's hand as they looked at the name engraved on the stone. "Do you want to say something?" Daniel asked gently. Emily thought for a long moment. Then shook her head. "That girl on the tombstone never existed. I existed. I've always been alive. I don't need to say goodbye to something that was never real." Daniel smiled with tears in his eyes. His daughter was wiser than many adults he knew. He signaled to the workers waiting at a respectful distance. They came with tools and began removing the tombstone. As the marble was loaded onto a truck, Emily felt an immense weight lifted from her shoulders. That grave had represented the temporary victory of evil. Now it was just stone being taken away. "Where are we going now?" she asked her father. "Wherever you want," Daniel replied. They went to a park. Something simple. Something normal. Emily ran across the grass chasing pigeons, while Daniel sat on a bench watching. Other families were having picnics nearby. Children laughed on swings. Dogs chased balls. Ordinary life. Precious life. Life he had almost lost forever. A girl Emily's age approached shyly, asking if she wanted to play tag. Emily looked at her father, silently asking permission. Daniel nodded. And then she ran. Ran free. Ran happy. Ran like the child she deserved to be. Daniel pulled out his phone and called Thomas Way. "Thomas, I want you to prepare the documents for the foundation we discussed. The Emily Carter Foundation for Missing Children. I will allocate $500 million to help families searching for their children. So that other kids have the chance my daughter had to come home." "That's a beautiful decision, Daniel," Thomas replied with an emotional voice. When Emily ran back, her cheeks red from playing, Daniel hugged her tightly. "I love you more than any fortune in the world," he said. "I know, Dad," Emily replied simply. "And I love you too." That night, as he tucked Emily into bed, Daniel noticed something. She had asked to leave the hallway light on. But not because she was afraid of the dark. Simply because she liked to see the light. "Dad," she said sleepily, "do you think we'll ever forget everything that happened?" "No," Daniel replied honestly. "We will never forget. But we will learn to carry these memories without letting them stop us from being happy. The scars are part of who we are now. But they don't define who we will be tomorrow." Emily smiled and closed her eyes. Daniel left her room and went to the veranda. He looked at the calm lake reflecting the full moon. He thought about everything they had been through. About how evil had disguised itself as love. About how he had almost lost everything. But he also thought about how true love had triumphed in the end. Not through violence or brutal revenge, but through courage, intelligence, and the refusal to give up on each other. Life had taught him a painful but necessary lesson. Trust is precious. True family is not defined by blood or marriage, but by genuine loyalty. And sometimes, the greatest strength is not in never falling, but in rising after being knocked down. Daniel took a deep breath of the night's fresh air. Tomorrow would be a new day. And he would live that day not as a man haunted by the past, but as a father grateful for the present and hopeful for the future. If you enjoyed this story of overcoming injustice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment with what you thought and from which city or country you're watching. Your interaction helps this channel grow and bring more emotional stories like